You are now tuned in to the Edge Work Podcast with David Pagnotta, Dennis Bernstein, and Zack Bodenstein.
And back here on the Edge Work Podcast, guys, it's been a year of disappointing teams, and we can go down the list, we can break them down. How are they going to react in the offseason? Because things have just been a mess for a few teams. And Dave, one team I know you've wanted to talk about, and we have been touching on throughout the year, the New York Islanders. They're in action against Montreal tonight, a must-win game. If they don't win, there could be some major fallout from that team, from an organizational standpoint, from the players. So what are you looking at with the Islanders, and what could potentially happen if they don't come through and make the playoffs?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty much a must-win, although the way Pittsburgh's been playing may not matter because the Penguins are just shooting themselves in the foot. But with respect to the Isles, I mean, this is a team that it's been up and down all season. Like, we thought they were going to be in better positioning. They bring in Bo Horvat. They make the big deal. They sign him to this big extension. He goes out there and craps all over Vancouver, which wasn't the fan base. It was more the organization. So whatever. It is what it is. But that's kind of that's the situation. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's basically a must-win because you get 2 points, you automatically clinch. But if they don't for whatever reason, or even if it's an early exit, like a quick 4-game sweep, Boston just rolls over them, which I don't know if that'll happen, but let's say it does. Yeah, we could see some significant changes there, and not necessarily on the ice exclusively, but off it as well. DB, I don't know if you've heard, but yeah. I haven't heard that Lou's got an extension. So he's in the final year of his contract. I'm sure ownership is going to want to have a discussion with Lou Lamoriello about his direction and what he wants to do if this team either misses the playoffs or is out quick. So that's going to dictate a lot of what's going to happen there. I know there's been some lobbying for, Chris Lamoriello, Lou's son, to take over. I have pretty good authority. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, I want to see what's going to happen with this club over these next couple of weeks here. And it may just be this week if they can't get their act together against the Habs tonight.
Yeah, and I think from a coaching standpoint, Zach, I think if they don't make it, like the last month, they haven't played great. If they played better, they wouldn't be sweating this game against the Habs. And I think that also goes to the guy behind the bench, Lane Lambert. Like, what has this team done under him? Really not much. They've kind of stood in place. They were better than last season. They had to be better than last season because of COVID and that ridiculous trip when the building opened. So I get all the obstacles they had last season. Yeah. But look, Barzal out has certainly changed this team without question. Right? They are far less dynamic. They're slow, and that's their MO. They play defense and goaltending. So if they get in, yeah, they could cause some teams trouble in the first round. But overall, the performance of this team, I don't know. I think there needs to be significant, because I think what's going to happen with respect to what Dave says is this team ready for a deep run in the East? I don't think so. No. I think they're 1 and out. And then you got to look at everybody from the top down because the expectations were high. Luke put the band back together because he thought he had a team from 2 seasons ago that took Tampa to 7. And it's certainly not that type of team that's going to go to a conference final. So it's going to be really interesting to what happens, because I agree with Dave. They should get in, but I don't know. Like, you look at a team like Chicago, Zach, they ruined Calgary's season, and they probably ruined Pittsburgh's season. So to think that, okay, and I think the Oz only need a point tonight. I don't even trust any of these teams right now, and that's the difference. I think the one team that's come through is Florida, but these 2 teams on the outside that are battling for this 7 and 8 for this last spot in the East, I'm not confident if they get in either one that they're going to do any damage.
Yeah.
Islanders seem like the kind of team they either make the conference final or they just flame out. And this might be one of the seasons where they just flame out. It's between them and Pittsburgh right now, guys. When I watch the Islanders, it looks like Zach Parise is really the only one that really catches my eye. This is a dull team right now. And when Sorokin isn't on his game, he didn't have the sharpest game the other day. Yeah. This is a very beatable team. But so is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has not looked sharp by any means. DB, I already know your reaction. You have your season on the line and you lose to the Blackhawks. Oh. I already know this is what you're going to say because, I mean, ultimately, how does that happen? And Pittsburgh is not in great shape right now either. And they're, again, right in the mix with it with the Islanders.
And just before DB jumps in, like, what the hell's Chicago doing winning games? Like, don't you want Connor Bedard? Don't you want the best odds at Connor Bedard? Stop winning hockey games. Yeah. Silly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, look, when you're Pittsburgh and you see Islanders go into Washington, a team that's out, and they start that way and they wind up losing that game, like, okay, the door's open. All we got to do is go in and beat Chicago. And they just,
Right.
I don't know, Tristan Jarry, he's not going to be in Pittsburgh next year. I'll tell you that much. Short of some big run in the playoffs, which I don't see. It's just really disappointing. And then you got to look at the front office. You got to look at Ron Hextall. You got to look at Sullivan behind the bench. Like he brought, again, it's the same situation as the Islanders. They kept the team together, and I get it. Like you got icons there. You got Tanger. You got Gino. Like you had to bring them back, right? Now, lesser price, I get it. I understand it. But come on, like 9th place for this team, like you got to manage your expectations. If I'm ownership, I got to make changes because right now they're going to miss the playoffs. And that's just not acceptable. Like you say, look, getting them one round, and they haven't won a round since they played and they won the cup. I get that. But 9th place? Like, really? Like, no, it's super disappointing for this team because they are better, but there's a lot of challenges, a lot of issues in Pittsburgh right now because they shouldn't be in this spot right now, to be frank.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. 1 point the Islanders need. 1.
Yep.
And Pittsburgh season's over. So, look, I understand that I get the mindset from ownership, and the mandate was we've got those guys. We've got legends with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. So let's insulate them. Let's build around them. Let's get things going. Raquel's been solid. Gensel's been great. Zucker's been solid. But you have other holes that you weren't able to fill. And with all due respect to Mikael Granlund, the hell, you haven't done much, really. And now, I don't watch every Penguins game, so I don't know how he's being positioned throughout the course of an entire game for the last 10, 12 games. Or whatever. And I know Kulikov was hurt. He just came back the other night. And this, that, and the other. That's great. Whatever. But those were the moves that you went after? And I get that you tried to get Brock Besser. You tried to get JT Miller. And it seemed like they focused more on Miller, even though the Besser talks were active as well. You put all your eggs in those baskets. And then you had to pivot, and Granlund was your answer. I mean, there's going to be a serious discussion, I think, regardless of whether they make the playoffs or not in Pittsburgh. There's going to be a serious discussion between ownership, the president of Hockey Ops, Brian Burke, and their GM, Ron Hextall, to decide whether or not Hexie's the right guy to move forward with this club. So we'll wait and see. Their season, as we said, it could end tonight. So we'll have to wait. But something's got to give at some point with Pittsburgh because the offseason is going to be interesting. I agree with DB. I think it's time to move on from Jarry, even though he's been solid for the most part in his tenure. But you got to make some significant changes somewhere. And go get John Gibson already.
There has to be consequences, Zach, for missing the playoffs in Pittsburgh. There has to be. It's not we came close, we only missed by a point. No, not this team. And they haven't been good in the playoffs. So even if they got in, they probably would have got knocked out. But there's got to be something's got to change because this is an older team. All its stars, except for maybe Gensel, are older. They're in their mid to late 30s. I don't know how you change this team. They made a big bet to bring these guys back, and they lost on this bet.
Yeah, Dennis, they haven't missed the playoffs since 2006. If you count that COVID play-in where they expanded the playoffs to 20 teams or whatever, and they didn't end up whatever. If you count that, they haven't missed since 2006. And Dave, you bring up a good point. If you're going to buy with this club after signing Brian Rust to that deal, after making the Jeff Petrie trade, don't kind of tiptoe around it by getting Mikael Granlund and Dmitry Kulikov. Go for a JT Miller, bring him home. And they didn't do that, obviously, and they might be paying the consequences for that. Another team that had a very busy offseason that we thought maybe could have been better going into this year than they were last year, if that was even possible, the Calgary Flames, has not happened. And that is an understatement. They have blown up. They've flamed out, pun intended, absolutely. It's not been good. It has not been pretty in Calgary. Dave, we touched on it a few episodes ago. Could there be changes? Treliving, Sutter, some player personnel? What's going on with Calgary right now after officially being eliminated from the playoff race?
Well, first they're going to figure out if Treliving's going to stay. And there's going to be a discussion with ownership end of this week, this weekend, next week, sometime soon, to determine what route they want to take. Is Tree going to be sticking around? If he is, I think Darryl stays. But I don't know. I understand the argument in the shootout. Toffoli's only 2 for 17 career and blah, 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 blah. Your argument against that is using Nick Ritchie, who scored against that goalie before once. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't. He's your MVP this season. You throw him out there. Maybe don't put him last, put him first, but you throw him out there. There are a lot of decisions. That's the other thing. Like, Toffoli loves Daryl. So I don't know what the hell's going on there. You'd think that maybe that would work.
And he didn't use Lindholm either in the shootout.
No. So, look, there are a lot of decisions, coaching decisions, that a lot of people have scratched their head at. Minutes. I keep comboing words today. Minute usage, things like that. Like, I don't get it. And yeah, some players have had to be better. Huberdeau needed to be better. Weegar needed to be better. Nazas needed to be better, and so on and so on and so on. But you brought those guys in for a reason. So you're going to reduce their minutes. You're going to play Huberdeau on the off wing forever. And I think there are going to be some serious changes in Calgary. I know they took calls on Lindholm ahead of the deadline. Nothing got serious. The price tag was too high, but they took calls. I think they're going to do that again this summer. I think they're going to listen on a few guys. I think we're going to hear, and this is something I brought up in February, and everybody shit all over it. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I could say that, but we can bleep that out if we need to. You're going to hear Mackenzie Weegar's name. I'm off. I'm horrible. I'm sorry. But Mackenzie Weegar's name, you're going to hear again this offseason. His extension doesn't kick in until July 1, whereas no trade kicks in as well. There are teams that express interest. There will be more teams that will express interest, and they are going to flock to Calgary, just like all the vultures will do when you're in trouble. That's what's going to happen. I'm not saying he's getting moved, but there will be teams that will kick some tires on him. There are going to be teams that are going to be kicking other tires as well on other guys. I just don't know if it's Tree that's going to be picking up that phone call.
Oh, it's my turn. Oh, good. Okay, so look, they say that, they had all these overtime losses, and that's it. They hadn't won half those games to be in the playoffs. Guess what? When you lose in overtime, you're not good enough to win in regulation, right? So the team wasn't good enough. And then some of the usage, like Huberdeau, you pay him all that money, and you stick him on the third line at times. Like, when he came, Darryl should have said, you're on the first line, you scored 110, whatever it was, you broke the record for left wing assists. He should have been on the first line, and that's it, and stuck with him. Naz Kadri, he learned he's not an 80-point scorer like he was in Colorado. And I get it. I understand it. A lot of time, and I kept saying this, 82 goals left when Johnny and Chucky now was on people's MVP ballots. Mm-hmm. So and I get it. He wasn't going to sign there. I get that. I understand that. But it's not like the cupboard was bare. You brought in Jonathan Huberdeau, who I mentioned was over 100 point. You brought in Naz Kadri, and you couldn't figure out how to get these guys to be better offensively. Some of it was, hey, look, last year was a great year for you, but Andrew Mangiapane wasn't a 35-goal scorer in consecutive seasons. Elias Lindholm, that Dave mentioned, he scored 41 goals last year. He's not a 41 scorer. Although, I don't know. I mean, you see guys scoring 40 now. Maybe he's a 40-goal scorer. A lot of this lays on Darryl. Like, it's not like this team was bereft of talent, right? It wasn't like it had no talent. It had enough talent to get there. They just couldn't make big plays in big spots, and there's got to be consequences for it. And you hear the rumblings about it. That was hard to work with, and he's not, and the players aren't happy. That style doesn't work no more. Maybe it's going to work in Philly for a while with Torts. It just doesn't work anymore. The guys like Jim Montgomery, the positive guys, and not to say that Daryl's not a teacher, that type of personality seems to be working and resonating with players right now. The old school Daryl way, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And yeah, Nick Ritchie shouldn't be in the shootout. I'm sorry. And you can make all the excuses you want. But you put your team MVP and a 40-goal scorer from last year, they don't get to take a shot in the shootout. And I know it's just it's really, really small, Zach. But it's a microcosm of what's happened in this season in Calgary. There's been a lot of bad decisions by the coach. And you can love him and the cracks and all stuff, and he's won 2 cups here in LA. He's done a crappy job. So is the team. It's been a bad season. You got to make some significant changes. Maybe it starts with the GM, maybe it's the coach. But this group of players just wasn't good enough. And there's got to be consequences, like in Pittsburgh, maybe in New York with the Islanders, for not making the postseason when you man up and you pay all these. You paid Nas a lot of money. You paid Huberdeau a lot of money. There's got to be consequences for these decisions that didn't work out.
What have you done for me lately? That's what the fans care about. That's what ownership and most organizations care about. Look, I'm not gonna crap all over Tree's move, the Tkachuk trade. I think everybody would have made that trade.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, you move Tkachuk, you get another 115 point, whatever the hell it was, winger in Huberdeau that you have to sign, whatever. You bring in Weegar, who is Florida's best defenseman and one of the most underrated defensemen in the National Hockey League. You do that. You get a first-round pick in, I think, a couple of years, and you get some other kid. Who's saying no to that? At the time, that was a great trade. Nobody could have guessed this was how the season was going to go, but also nobody would have assumed that Huberdeau's minutes would have gone down, Weegar's minutes would have gone down. The coach would have made all these weird decisions and things like that. DB's right. That style doesn't work anymore. The BS with Peltier in the press conference, who is he, and da-da-da, and trying to be. I don't even know if he was trying to be funny. I think he just genuinely didn't give a crap and didn't know. Like, that stuff doesn't work anymore. So either you adjust, like Torts has been adjusting. Like, you either adjust and evolve, or you get put out to pasture. See ya, Daryl.
My buddy Cole Schwinn from the OHL, by the way, was the other kid in the trade. So,
my bad. Sorry.
But no, it brings up a really good point because Treliving had his back against the wall, right? Zero leverage. Tkachuk wants out. Gaudreau wants to go home. Everybody would have made the moves he made. And hindsight's 2020. You could say, obviously, now it didn't work out. But between the trades and the extensions, Dave, I think anybody would have made those moves.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it sounds like what you guys are saying is it came down to coaching and usage of the players and kind of getting this group together.
It's a combination for me. It is ultimately the coach and all those decisions that were made. But at the same time, as manager, you saw your team was floundering. You saw there was trouble. You didn't make those adjustments in real time, basically knowing that your season's going to be on the line. And after all the changes you made last summer, you have to make the playoffs this year. Those collateral moves, those additional moves, they weren't made. So, maybe it's time. Like, he did a good job. And based on that, he'll get a job somewhere else. I just think it might be in Calgary's best interest to move on, bring in a new voice at the top, bring in a new voice behind the bench, make some adjustments to the roster, and move forward.
Yeah. The only saving grace, Zach, for Calgary is, and the excuse they can use, is that the guy they're paying, $6 million in net.
Wow. Yeah.
Played. I think he played 17 of the last 18. Didn't save the season for him. Didn't win in big spots. And you saw it most games. They were out shooting the competition, but the other team would get 20 shots and 4 goals. And that's what happened in the Chicago game. He didn't deliver for them. So they could say, okay, he had an off season. The rest of the team is structurally good. Like, their defense is really solid. Rasmus Anderson, nobody talks about. He's a great defenseman. Addison solid. 100%. Like, they got a solid tough one. Another guy, the other thing that I mentioned this, he was a factor in Vancouver. He was a big factor in Calgary. When Christopher Tanev goes out of the lineup, they're a different team. Like, he is the glue on that defense. And so Darryl had the horses. Todd McClellan made a joke here last couple of weeks ago saying that you can't win the Derby on a donkey. Right? You need horses. You need horses to win the race. They had enough horses to be in the top 8. They had enough horses to be better than Seattle or Winnipeg or maybe even Los Angeles, and they didn't come through. Now you can lay it on the goaltender and say, okay, he didn't come up in big spots. So maybe that's the one mitigating factor if you're going to keep the management team in place. But other than that, they had the horses. They didn't deliver. And again, usually ownership says there's got to be consequence for that. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks.
Markstrom's not even playing the last game. It's going to be Dustin Wolf making his NHL debut.
I love that. Love it.
Yeah, good for him.
They're out.
Yep.
And this is the kid that they're going to look to, right? Markstrom has had a horrible fall from grace coming into this year. I love that.
It's too little too late in Calgary, and now it's way too late.
Okay, so Calgary's a team to watch this offseason for sure. Mackenzie Weegar's extension kicks in. That's a big extension, but he's certainly a good player. So we'll have to look at Calgary this offseason and see where they go from here, both from a managerial standpoint and also the guys on the ice. Now, guys, DB, I want to ask you about Seattle. What are your realistic expectations for this team? Nobody gave them a shot to get in the postseason. I remember we were writing them off to start the year when we were doing this show, and then they caught fire on that Eastern road trip. They made some history, And then they made some stingy moves at the deadline. So I'm wondering for you, what do you see from Seattle? Because they've clinched a playoff spot. We know they're going to play in the first round.
The season's a success, without question, like whatever happens. And they don't play great. The possible matchups, and that's the other thing, Zach. Like you asked me to predict what's going to happen with Seattle. I'll give you an example. I'm in LA. I'm going to follow the Kings to the playoffs. Right now, I could be in 4 different cities next week. I could be in Edmonton, Vegas, Dallas, or Denver, and I still don't know. So I can't tell you. I think they're going to be now. Joey DeCord's playing in net for them now, and they've been hot. They're going to be pesky. Do I think they're going to upset in the first round? Would I pick them for an upset? They would not be my upset special. It's been a great season. I just don't believe in their goaltending. I don't think it's going to be good enough in the postseason to stop these powerful teams. That if they play in Edmonton or they play in Vegas, they haven't done well historically, at least this season, against most of these teams they could play against. But it's a winning season regardless. If they come up and let's say they play Colorado. Let's say Colorado wins the Central, and they lose in 5. There's no shame. Mm-hmm. Now I'll say this: Colorado. I watched them the last couple of weeks, and look, Rantanen's on my MVP ballot. He's had a great season, over 50 goals. Nathan McKinnon, if he hadn't been injured, he probably would be second or third in the league in scoring. But this team is not the same without Cale Makar. He's irreplaceable. They are so. I watched them a couple of times. They're so less dynamic. Yep. So if Cale Makar's out and Seattle plays them, they can find a way to slow down their top line. Maybe they got a shot. So I think it's a real great success. The fact that Jared McCann has 40 goals is amazing. That's fat. Kudos to that guy. What a value contract that is right now. It's been a great story. And it's kind of like Vegas Golden Knights were in year 1 for Seattle in year 2. They've really done a great job. They do it by committee. They do have a 40-goal scorer. And I mentioned Lindholm not being a 40-goal scorer, but these days who is a 40-goal scorer? If I told you McCann was going to be 40, gee, man, on the Calgary said I was crazy. So it's a really nice story. This is a team that does it by committee. Do they have enough stars on this team to win in the playoffs? Because that's usually happens. You know, like the committees don't work to win the Stanley Cup, right? It's usually Stamkos or it's, Kucherov or star players that win you in the playoffs. So that's the thing. So I think they'll be pesky in the postseason, but not good enough to win around this season.
Dave, Seattle?
Yeah, I agree. Pesky. They're going to give whoever they face, some palpitations. But I don't think it's going to be more than that. They have some good shutdown guys. I like their decor. You're gonna turn to guys like Yanni Gourde, based on his experience in Tampa. You're gonna look to him to kind of help things out, at least from a shutdown perspective. I don't think there's enough there. And this isn't again, they surprised me wholeheartedly. Like I did not expect this team to be a playoff team this season. So kudos to them. They got their stuff together and they really got on track. And the future looks great, especially with Beniers, who's just been lights out, as DB mentioned earlier. I mean, he's going to get Selke consideration as well. But this is a player this is a team that has some really good pieces, but there's just not enough there to push them over. I could see them squeezing a game against Colorado, see them squeezing a game against Dallas or Vegas.
Yeah.
Are they going to win 4 or 7 against any of these teams? I don't see it. And again, not a slight against the Kraken, just the way it is. It is what it is. And they're going to continue to ride that. They're going to continue to grow.
And this group hasn't played a playoff game together. It's very, very, it gets to game 83. It's very different. You're not fighting for feet. You're fighting for inches. And we'll see how they respond. And I agree with it. They'll be pesky. They've beaten Colorado last time they played. They're a tough team. They're not like they're so overmatched and they got no shot. It's not that situation, right? But because they're going to stay in games because their defense is really big, and that's the other thing. Championship teams usually have really big defenses. Like Dallas when they got to the Cup final, Tampa, they have size on defense, so they're not going to give up a lot. Again, I think the question on this team is how are they going to play as a group in the playoffs, and what kind of offense is this team going to generate?
Yep.
Yeah, Kraken fans should be super proud of their team. 4 guys I'm looking at right now for the future. If you are a Kraken fan, 4 guys from the OHL, Ty Nelson, Tucker Robertson, David Goyette, Logan Morrison, all 4 guys tremendous and juniors. So their future is pretty bright, considering they are just an expansion team a couple years old. I think they've done really well in the draft and scouting department. And that'll go a long way for this team because now they've kind of built a foundation, not a winning foundation, but they are kind of making their way up there. Guys, so how about playoff predictions? Now that we're looking ahead, we're talking about the teams that aren't very good and aren't going to make it, transitioning to Seattle. And now the teams that obviously are going to make some noise. DB had Carolina go into the Cup final in the preseason. He might have changed his mind on that. So I'm wondering, Dennis, with you, what are you looking at for the conference final and also the Cup final?
Well, I had Colorado. I had Carolina over Colorado. There's just not enough scoring on Carolina. They're going to keep games close. They could get to a conference final, but I don't know. There's that 600-pound gorilla sitting in the back bay in Boston called the Bruins.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see any flaws. I don't. I like they're healthy now. Taylor Hall and Tara Bertuzzi on the third line. Some nights Orlov could be on the third pair. Like you could play Swayman and win the Cup. That's how good this team is. I don't see them getting derailed short of injuries or just fatigue from. And I mentioned this a couple of times on this podcast throughout the season. Like, and they're resting Krejci now. You see it, so they know like to get through winning 16 games with a 37, 36-year-old centers. That could be a challenge for this team. But right now, I got to pick Boston. Some teams might give them trouble, but they're just too complete a team. Sometimes it's just your year. Sometimes it's not. And I know some guy on Twitter last night said, "Oh, it's kind of tainted. They're point record because there was no overtime. There's overtimes and ties back in the day." I'm like, how can you say tainted in the same sentence with a team that's won 64 games? There's no taint on this team. I'm sorry. They had a great regular season. Now, Zach, here's the thing. The President's Trophy. It's been 10 years since the President's Trophy teams won a Stanley Cup, and that was Chicago in 12-13. So that's maybe, if I'm Montgomery, that's what I'm telling my team every day for the next 2 weeks. Like, you know what? It doesn't mean jack. Like, we got to go out and win this. Yeah. So that's the one. But I still like Colorado. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that if McCarr's healthy, they can get out. But Boston, I don't know. Maybe the Rangers because of the star power guys, but I got to think Boston. It's Boston's to lose at this point in time. They're just too good, too deep, too complete, and too well coached.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Cup ends up in Boston, which obviously they put some in the conference final before getting to the Cup. But and I agree with Carolina's or DB's assessment of Carolina. I just don't think there's enough in the tank this year. I think they had an opportunity to get some more, and they weren't able to pull it off for whatever reason, whatever hesitation got in their way. They didn't do it. So I could see, like, I'm concerned about. I love Shesterkin, but I'm concerned about what I've seen in New York in the second, not even the second half, the last quarter of the season. Now, does it just shift automatically come game 83 and they get their stuff together? Maybe. I don't know if I bank on that just yet, but I could see a New Jersey-Boston final in the East. I could certainly see that coming into play, but then Boston will take it, and then they'll take the Cup. Out West, I think Edmonton ends up getting out of their division, and I think they meet the Dallas Stars in the conference final. And honestly, I have no idea which team comes out on top in that one. Selfishly, and I think I speak for DB as well, because we're going to be covering the Cup final. We'll be back and forth. A Dallas-Boston travel schedule seems to be a little bit easier than a Boston-Edmonton travel schedule. So I might lean towards that, but I don't know. I want to see how these teams perform first before I decide, who's going to make it to the Cup final. Obviously, we have our predictions coming up later, and I got to figure it out. But I think
here's the number one reason why you don't want an Edmonton Boston final. Clearing customs 3 times. Like, who wants to do that? Even with Global Entry or Nexus, like, you don't want to go back and forth. And I talk to, like, here in LA, we talk privately with, like, nobody wants to go there. I mean, it's not because, look, Edmonton's got a great setup. I've said this before. If you get up there for a game, the JW Marriott's attached to the arena. You can walk in. You don't have to go outside, even if it's January. It's a beautiful hotel. It's a great arena. It's a great setup. So if you want to see the best player and the best 2 players in hockey, some people can argue, and you want to have stay in a really nice, go up there. But nobody wants to go to customs 3 times. They just don't. So
Pain in the ass.
It's a pain in the ass. So. But Edmonton could absolutely do it. But Edmonton's playing really well. That Matthias Ekholm trade, he's fine. You saw it last night. So yeah, that's
well,
it. So,
since what is it? Since December or since January, they're like 31-8-2 or something like that.
Yeah, best in the league.
Yeah,
that's not bad.
And I'll give one guy credit. Jack Michaels, the play-by-play guy for Sportsnet. Edmonton was in town in like November, and they were struggling. They were like 8th place and stuff like that. And I said, Jack, you worried about your team? He goes, look at the schedule. We played the hardest schedule in the first half of the season. On the back end, it's not as hard. And so we'll do really well. He was spot on. And they're right there. They can win. I think that Vegas will hold on. And I want to say one thing. Vegas is where they are without a 30-goal scorer. And Jack Eichel didn't play last night. That team, look, I'm not sure about Brossoit, but they are so damn mentally tough. Like, they don't care who's playing. Like, Michael Monaco's got, 15 goals this season? Like, they've done it without a 30-goal scorer. They've paid 5 goaltenders. Great job. And now Mark Stone might come back. I don't know. Maybe that's just hope against hope, putting him out there in a non-contact jersey. But all the things they've done to win the division, if I told you this was going to happen, like Stone's going to be out, Eichel's going to be out for a few games, they're going to play 5 goaltenders, say, okay, maybe they'll get a wild card. It's in their hands. They can win the division in Seattle. Like, that's a great job by Bruce Cassidy. I get it. Like, they got tired of him in Boston. He's done a fantastic job. This team is mentally tough, and that's why they're going to be tough in the playoffs. Not because they have the most talented team in the league. They don't. But they're depthful. Again, size on defense and a great coping job. I want to give them a lot of credit for getting to where they are, given all the obstacles they've had this season.
They play tight. They play north-south, and Vegas certainly has established that culture. Bruce Cassidy, hockey man, it has really shown to be productive and successful. So absolutely. In terms of Edmonton, as we all predicted, a goaltender stealing the show for them, but not the goalie that we exactly thought. I mean, Stu Smith, give credit where it's due. The guy's been awesome for them. And, he had to pick up the slack, and everyone was kind of worried what's going to happen now that Campbell's struggling. But he's been great. Dallas, as you mentioned, Dave, this is a team you guys have been pumping all year. Ottinger showed in the postseason last year he can be the best of the best. They've got, like we talked about last week, Heiskanen, Lindell down the left side. The forward depth for the first time in a while really starting to show. So, yeah, it might be Boston's cup to lose, DB, but I really do think that there are a number of teams to watch, especially if Colorado's a little banged up. It could go a number of ways for sure.
It won't be a walk in the park for as much as we're picking Boston. But Zach, nobody's ever said, "Oh, that team had an easy run to the Stanley Cup." It just doesn't happen. Yeah. Even look at Colorado last year, right? Like, they got pushed by St. Louis, and if Helm doesn't score that goal with like a second left in Game 6, it's 7 games against the Blues. And if Brayden Point had played for Tampa last year, maybe it's a different story. So nobody has an easy walk. There are teams. Look, the second round, like Tampa, Toronto, that's going to be a challenge for Boston. And coming out of the team coming out of Metro, it's going to be a challenge. And Boston is great, and they had to win games. They don't win. They're not like Edmonton, though. They don't get when they beat you. They don't beat you 7-1. They beat you 3-2. They beat you 3-1. They beat you 4-2. Pasternak scores a goal late to beat you. So it's not like, we had a shot to win that game, but we can't find ways to beat this team because they just win the big spot. They don't make mistakes. They find a way to score a big goal. So that's it. But it's not going to be easy for Boston, even though they are the prohibitive favorite, and they should be.
It's going to be fun to watch, 100%. Guys, this is the last episode we're going to do this year for the regular season. But just want to say it's been tons of fun. Producer Jason as well. Like, the whole team has just really come together and grown a lot. So it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys, enjoy your travels during the playoffs. I hope, we can still kind of keep that and build something towards next year because it's been a lot of fun and there's certainly a lot of good hockey to look forward to.
Yeah, totally. Been a ton of fun this season. Playoffs are just about to get underway next week. So, yeah, can't wait for that. And can't wait to keep this going again. So, boys, it's been a pleasure.
I'm already making my plans for September. Kings, Coyotes, and Melbourne.
Yeah.
So, exactly. Yeah. So. But yeah, it's been a great season. Zach, you've been a great host. It's been a lot of fun, and looking forward to the future.
All right, guys, enjoy the playoffs. Enjoy baseball season. Yankees, Jays. You guys will figure it out, and I don't know. Dave thinks the Jays. DB thinks the Yankees. I'm siding with one of you. I'm not going to say who because I don't want to make enemies here, but both teams.
Only baseball, Zach. Exactly.
Yeah, let's go. Just Barrios, figure it out, please, for the love of God.
And Dave's going to try that poutine hot dog at Rogers Center this year, no doubt about it.
Probably, yeah. Maybe later this week. We'll see.
All right, guys. So it's been a great year. Enjoy the playoffs. Again, enjoy baseball season. Thank you to everybody for listening and watching this season. And we're really looking forward to getting going again next year. But, of course, the playoffs come before that. So enjoy all the hockey. And we will see you in October.